So I'm dressed for autumn, and it's pretty hard to believe really that I'm talking about August sowings. It's just so kind of cold and breezy and wet outside. It's really horrible, but it's not too bad in this polytunnel. Anyway, before I get started with my sewing guide for August, I just wanted to talk about my new newsletter. You can find it at steverichards.substack.com, and there'll be a link down in the description below as well. And the reason that's relevant to this video is that the newsletter will be coming out on the same day as this video, so the 1st of August, will cover the kind of broader picture of August, you know, sort of how to think about what to sow in August, how to think about sowing dates in August, the other things that you need to be doing in August and all of that sort of thing. So it just provides a more rounded view, as well as the sort of things you can harvest in August, you know, and plant in August and all of that. You know, it's just, it gives you a much bigger context. And you'll also find in that newsletter links to everything related to August and what to do, including obviously links to this video and links to my sewing guides and all of that sort of thing. So I do recommend that you subscribe to that newsletter, because it is kind of part of the whole kind of system that I've created here. And yeah, and it's free to subscribe, although there is an option to pay if you want to support me as well. So let's get on. I'm doing it on my iPad as always, and the database that I'm looking at, you can find a link to that in the description below and in the newsletter. So right, let's get on. Start off with radish. So we haven't had any radish for quite a long time now, because we don't like a radish in summer, but it's a good time now to start sowing radish. But you've only got a relatively short sort of time window for it, because root growth takes a lot of energy. And as we get into September and sort of mid-September to the end of September, energy levels from the sun are dropping quite considerably, and plants just don't have a lot of energy left for root growth. So, you know, August is your real time window for sowing, but they do stand in the ground for quite a long time, unlike, you know, growing in summer. So you don't need, you know, you can sow in bigger batches. You go through August, towards the end of August, you can sow in bigger batches, knowing that they'll kind of stand in the ground for, you know, quite a few weeks before you need to harvest them. So then we go on to salad onions. Now obviously I've got quite a few salad onions sown already, just germinated, and also quite a few in the ground, because I like to harvest salad onions every week of the year. And so those are the ones that will be harvesting in autumn. So these are the salad onions really that will be harvesting in winter, like the late autumn and winter. And then later on in the month they'll be the ones that will be harvesting in spring. I'm doing two varieties. I'm doing Guardsman and Lilia. I always call it Lila for some reason, but anyway, it's Lilia. And that's a red salad onion. It's really lovely. It's one of my favourites. But North Holland Blood Red is another alternative, and it's actually cheaper, I think, to buy North Holland Blood Red, so you might want to consider that. So next up we've got turnips, and just like radish, same sort of story there, but even more severe for turnips. Turnips are not quite as fast growing as radish, and obviously they're bigger than radish, and so they kind of run out of steam a little bit earlier. So really early August is your time really for growing turnips. You can push it a little bit later if you're going to grow them under cover, where there's a little bit of extra warmth, and that extra warmth compensates for the lower light levels, but don't leave it too long. Then we come on to lamb's lettuce. Now lamb's lettuce is a really important crop for us, because it matures, is ready for harvest in the middle of winter and the late winter. And that is just the time really when true lettuce has basically run out of steam and stopped growing. So it's a really great complement to bulk out your salads in winter if you eat salads every day like I do. But there are a few things to think about with lamb's lettuce, and one of them is that if you sow it early, you know, like now, August, early August, it is likely to get a bit of mildew on the leaves, and you can partially mitigate that by keeping it really well watered. And if you do get a bit of mildew though, don't worry, it'll generally grow through it. Remove the worst affected leaves and then just let it sort of grow through it, and over time it probably will pull through. Later sowings don't tend to get that problem, but then later sowings won't probably mature in time for winter harvest. So that's something to bear in mind, and don't leave it too long into spring, because pretty much, you know, by March it's starting to rise. By mid-March to the end of March it's probably gone to seed on you. So and the leaf quality does kind of decline quite substantially as it starts to go to seed. Kales. Now, I don't really recommend doing kales at this time of year, early August, but there are occasions where it's worthwhile. What I tend to do right now, in fact I did it this morning, is I go around and I look at all my brassicas and I kind of give them an assessment. I'm looking for signs of cabbage root fly, excessive white fly, you know, caterpillar damage, all this sort of thing, and trying to think, am I going to manage to get through winter with the brassicas that I've already got planted? And if the answer to that question is yes, then I don't sow any now. If the answer to that question is no, and last year that was the answer, because I had a big problem with club root in my collet bed, and I was like, what am I going to do? You know, obviously I can't sow more colettes at this time of year. So I planted a big batch of kales, put them under a low tunnel, because they really need that extra warmth at this time of year to grow fast enough. They don't need it actually, you know, in August and September, but they do need the warmth in sort of October, November and December to keep on growing strongly enough, so you're going to get a harvest in sort of late winter and spring. So I did need them then, but now it's looking okay. I've lost 2 or 3 plants to cabbage root fly, but most of them are looking pretty strong. So I'm thinking I'm fairly safe, so I probably won't sow them. But you know, like me, I'm always erring on the side of caution, so I might just bung in a few sort of reflex kales or something like that just in case. So we come to overwintered onions, and again there's always a bit of a story in August and September. It's not just about just sow them, you know, and it'll work. You know, that there are things to think about, and that's the sort of stuff I talk about more in my newsletter. So with overwintered onions, the issue is sow them too early, and then they'll be too big in spring. And if they're too big in spring, they'll go to seed, because the plants are going to look at themselves and think, well, I'm in my 2nd year because I'm really big. And so go to seed on you. Sow them too late, and they won't be big enough and strong enough to manage to get through winter. And so, well, particularly a harsh winter. So how do you make up your mind? Because nobody knows whether the winter's going to be mild or the winter's going to be harsh. The tendency is now it's going to be mild. So I would tend to sow my Japanese onions a little bit later than you used to sow them maybe 10 years ago. So 10 years ago you might have sown them at the end of July. Now it's more like the beginning of August, early August or the middle of August. I'm doing multiple batches because we use a lot of onions in spring, and if I find I've got too many, then I'll just harvest them early as, you know, sort of 1 inch, 2 inch onions. If we have a harsh winter and they're all, you know, get a little bit small, then I'll leave them until later on in the year. You know, basically multiple batches are your friend, and I generally have plenty of space for the overwintered onions. You know, in winter, because obviously we've got a lot of bed space that time of year. And the worst thing that can happen is, you know, you need the bed in February or something like that to plant out maybe some early brassicas. You just harvest them as salad onions. So for me, it's just worth doing multiple batches, spread them around a little bit, and one of those batches will almost certainly work out great for early onions, and one of them will certainly work out great for late onions that you might keep until the end of the year, say. So that's my philosophy around overwintered onions. Then we come to Claytonia. Now, Claytonia is such a fabulous winter salad. It's one of those, you know, generally speaking, salads in the middle of winter are disappointing at best. You know, the leaf is not as crisp, and, you know, the leaf quality is not as high as it is earlier and in spring. They're just a little bit disappointing, but Claytonia is one of those things that's just great. It's really great in the middle of winter, and it's even better if you grow it under cover in a low tunnel cold frame or a polytunnel like this one. So I'm sort of doubling down on Claytonia because, you know, we find it's just such a great lettuce, and it's so healthy as well. And it's so prolific. You know, you just cut it off and it grows again, cut it off and it grows again. You get, you know, 3 or 4 cuts off it. And so if you've got a couple of beds, then you get maybe 8 cuts, you know, 1 a week for 2 months or 3 months or something like that. So it's really fantastic. Highly recommended. And at this point, I'll just pause and just talk about my growing guides, because for everything that I'm talking about here, I've got a growing guide that goes into all the nitty-gritty details of sowing dates and how to plant and how to harvest, and how to look after it and fertilise it and everything. And yeah, so take a look at those. I'll just put them up at the side of the screen and just scroll through them so you can have a look. So they're just part of my ebook. They're in the individual growing guide section, and yeah, sort of highly recommended. Quite a lot of work went into those, and they're all sort of, I think, you know, proven now, unless they stay otherwise, you know, unless they're sort of experimental, like the melons, for example, is an experimental one. And you'll find loads of additional videos embedded into those growing guides as well. So back to this August. So lettuce, it's a great time to be sowing lettuce. You know, it's probably, you know, spring is probably the best time, to be honest, to be growing lettuce, but, you know, autumn's pretty good as well. And this batch of lettuce is the one that's going to grow mainly outside. I mean, it might be that sometimes sort of late in September I might pop a cold frame top over it or something like that, depending on the weather conditions. But for most of its life, normally this batch stays outside, and then it gets cleared in sort of, you know, November time probably, and the beds get replanted at that point, and I switch over to the lettuce that will be growing in this polytunnel, which I'll plant in October and sow in September. So I won't go through every lettuce, but because you can obviously look at these for yourself, but there's a nice variety, and I like doing lots of different varieties, small quantities of lots of different varieties, and I find that is just the most resilient way. And then if you get a particular variety that gets a bit of downy mildew, for example, then most of the other varieties probably won't. If you get a few varieties that perhaps get something like cutworm, other varieties might not. And scatter them around as well, you know, diversify in terms of the number of varieties and the number of locations that you're growing in. So lots of different lettuces, really exciting time lettuce wise, because the lettuces over summer have not it's not been good. We've just about pulled through, but it's not been good. So then another batch of salad onions, and as I say, these are the ones that we'll be harvesting in spring. And spinach. So I've already got some spinach, so it's germinated. It'll be planted out in a couple of weeks, a week or so's time. What I find is that early batch, so that at the end of July, there's a chance that it'll run to seed still. If we happen to have, it will be a chance. It would be a nice thing. Good weather in September. Well, at the end of August and September, then it might run to seed. It might be just a little bit hot for spinach. If you sow it in the middle of August, you're pretty much confident it's not going to go to seed. And we'll be harvesting that spinach, you know, all the way through until winter. And in winter, and it'll be probably growing outside, unprotected. But once we get to winter, it'll stall outside. It really won't put on much growth. Particularly a variety like this, you know, that I'm doing Rubino, and you know, it's one of these red-stemmed spinaches. They don't do as well as over winter as the green varieties, so it'll stall. So I'd probably take that out, because otherwise in spring when it restarts, I'll just have ridiculous amounts of spinach, and I'll get it replanted with something for spring, probably something like spring lettuce varieties or something like that. And then I've got my second batch of the tough ball Japanese onions, and my second batch of lamb's lettuce, and then we're on to the pak choys. Now I have already got pak choys growing quite nicely, little seedlings, and they're the sort of what I consider to be the catch crop. So, you know, they won't go all the way through to winter, but we'll, you know, grow them in this polytunnel probably and harvest them by October. and this batch is the one that lasts a lot longer. It lasts all the way through until winter, and then just like the spinach, it'll stall outside and leaf quality will start to drop, and you know, it's just I don't want to be eating it at that point. So I'll switch over to a later batch which I'll grow in this polytunnel again, sown in September and planted out in October. So that's the Asian greens. I'm only doing 2, so I'm only just doing red pak choi and tatsoi at that time, and salad rocket. So salad rocket is perfect at this time of year, middle of August, and that'll go outside again. And again, just like all these other things, it'll stall by the time it gets to winter. And so you could do a later batch of it and put it under cover, sow it in September, plant it out in October. But I probably won't do that, because I still find that even in winter, in the middle of winter, salad rocket is really not that great a veg. And there's better ones, so I'm going to use my undercover space for something a bit more valuable. And then my third batch of salad onions, and probably my last batch of radish. Sometimes I experiment with a bit later batch, but you know, by the time we're getting well through August, you know, quality's kind of starting to decline a little bit. So that's it for August. So yeah, my name's Steve. This is the Seaside Kitchen Garden and Allotment channel, and do take a look at the resources that I've linked in the description, and I'll see you soon.